Ælfscathea. Below lay the port city of Ælfscathea, Drukhari spires rising like daggers from the deck of the ancient hulk. Webways of walkways, cruel bridges, and baroque towers crawled across the hollowed chambers of the ship. It was a Xenos enclave born of terror and artistry, and it lived. From the shadowed gantry, the Void Revenants gazed upon Ælfscathea, the hidden heart of the Drukhari domain. Once this vast chamber had been the storage and docking bays of an imperial warship, a titan of the Great Crusade. Its dividing walls had long since been stripped away, the skeletal framework fused into a single cavernous space. Where once the Navy had stored tanks, landing craft, and munitions, there now sprawled an alien city. Xenos architecture had consumed the hulk. Baroque spires and needle-thin towers rose from the decking like a forest of knives, some reaching high enough to vanish into the haze of smoke and mist that clung to the rafters. The open floor was a teeming sprawl of streets and market stalls, where cloaked figures bartered and bickered in 100 tongues, the air alive with the stench of oils, blood, and strange perfumes. It was not only the floor that was used. The walls and ceiling, assisted by gravitic stabilizers and repulsor fields, had been turned into living surfaces. Buildings clung to the vertical bulkheads and even the overhead vault, forming a 360-degree labyrinth of alien habitation. Light strips, crude fire bowls, and phosphorescent globes cast an unearthly illumination across the bustling streets, while Drukhari skimmers and jet bikes threaded between structures in fluid arcs. Far below, where a massive launch bay once opened into the void, an arena roared with life. Thousands of Drukhari and their debased vassals filled the stands, shrieking and jeering as warriors and beasts fought to the death under flickering hollow lights. The blood-red glow of the arena's killing floors painted the surrounding streets with a hellish cast. Across the city, a harbor of nightmares sprawled. Docks and mooring bays held a riot of vessels, serpentine Drukhari raiders and sleek corsairs, brutish rogue trader cutters, and ramshackle pirate craft. Above all, dominating the entire enclave, sat a colossal Drukhari warship resting in silent menace across the span of a docking trench. The Shadowfang, the flagship of the Void Reaver himself. Its sleek hull was bristling with cruel vanes and sails, coiled like a predator at rest. Its presence gave the whole city the air of a den ruled by a single alpha predator, daring any to challenge it. Beyond the city's bounds, where the void should have opened into endless stars, instead stretched a hexagonal veil of camo fields. Chameleon projectors formed a seamless illusion of empty space, concealing the hive of predators from any casual scan. It was as if the city existed in a pocket of unreality, hidden, secure, and lethal. Bjornwolf felt the weight of it settle on his mind. This was no scavenger outpost. This was a predator's lair, the heart of Ælfscathea, and the Shadowfang ruled here as king. Bjornwolf stood silently, one gauntleted hand gripping the rusted rail of the gantry. His helm lenses swept the sprawl below, taking in the impossible tangle of alien life. For a long moment, none of the Void Revenants spoke. The only sound was the low hiss of their armor's breath regulators and the faint hum of the Sildathnadel at his side. "By the throne," Bergwijn finally said, his voice low over the squad vox. "That's no raider camp. That's a fortress." "A fortress and a nest," Ethelnoth said, resting his assault cannon on the railing. His voice was rough, tight with the effort of keeping his temper in check. "Look at them. Tens of thousands, maybe more. They've made a city in the bones of our dead." Sirherd adjusted his optics, feeding magnified pics to his visor. "Gravity stabilizers, power relays, these aren't scavengers. This is a permanent stronghold. They've been here for centuries." He paused, cycling to Auspec's overlay. "Multiple heat signatures, Voidcraft active. Throne save us, that's the Shadowfang herself." Bjornwolf nodded slowly. "So the rumors were true? The Void Reaver keeps his lair inside the corpse of an Imperial warship." He gestured at the bustling streets below. "A hidden empire in the dark, feeding on our worlds." "Then we burn it," Athelnoth growled. His clawed gauntlets flexed around the grip of his weapon. "One signal to the Eotinsip, one word to the chapter, and we scour this hive from the stars." "No," Bjornwolf said, his voice firm. His warriors fell silent, recognizing the tone that brooked no argument. He turned to face them, the dim red glow from the arena far below reflecting in his helm lenses like twin coals. We are 4 men, deep in enemy territory, surrounded by enough Xenos to drown us in their blood. If the Eotinsip attacks blind, they'll die before they fire a second salvo. He looked back over the alien city, watching the skimmers dart between spires and the arena erupt in another wave of cheers. No, we learn, we watch, and when the time comes, we strike where it will hurt them most. We are Void Revenants, hunters, not fools. Searherd crouched beside the rail, slowly panning his optics over the Shadowfang. I'll mark their generators and weak points for the shipmaster. Even a hidden city like this bleeds if you cut the right artery. Ethelnoth rumbled his agreement. Then will be the knife in its heart. Bjornwolf's hand lingered on the railing, his gaze fixed on the Shadowfang resting like a sleeping leviathan in its berth. We are ghosts in their graveyard, he thought, and soon they will know it. The chapter Vox crackled to life, a thin thread of sound through the oppressive silence of the gantry. Runesmith Torhairn's voice carried across the link, heavy with excitement. We've just picked up your signal. You'll never guess what we've found. Bjornwolf glanced at the flickering display on his wrist plate. The signal was weak, but the interference was minimal, remarkable given the depth of the hulk. He looked across the cityscape of Ælfscathea below, calculating where the other team must be, likely on the far side of the Xenos sprawl. He toggled the Vox. Big city. Lots of Drukhari, fleet of pirate raiders lurking about. There was a pause on the line, then Torhairn's surprise was audible. You have one too? Before Bjornwolf could reply, Wilmond cut in. His voice was steady but underscored with a note of awe. We followed the manifold's energy lines. They've got the warp reactors of the old warship running. The whole city feeds on that power. But the hollow field and the oxygen shell, they're run from a freighter tethered to the hull by heavy cables. If you're thinking of an offensive, Bjornwolf allowed a grim smile. Not yet. For now, we learn the lay of the land. Ælfric's voice intruded on the Vox, cutting through clearer than the others, his psychic resonance sharpening the words. We are 8 Astartes, facing an entire Drukhari kingdom. We should take the parts we need and escape, bring the fleet to bear. There was no mistaking the librarian's tone, dismissive, measured, impatient. He was not wrong, Bjornwolf thought, but he lacked faith. We are a chief librarian, a chapter master, a runesmith, and the chapter's Hearthguard veterans, Bjornwolf replied, his voice calm but edged with iron. I think it is the Drukhari who require reinforcement. Ælfric scowled beneath his helm, though none could see it. Searherd's helm display flashed with a warning. He'd picked up Vox chatter on the Navis Astra Wigathane band. This close to the hull, they could intercept the Voidsman channels. He keyed a Vox Thief transmission. Any unit, this is Void Revenant. Identify. Static crackled, and then a familiar voice broke through. Lord, this is Voxman Ordmer. Can I have an ident? Searherd quickly scrambled the frequency, jumping to high band to avoid detection. Outside, on the scarred hull of the hulk, Hālgengas stared down at the vast expanse below. The surface was cratered and pitted, stripped by millennia of debris impacts and void exposure. The Shadowfang was gone, utterly vanished, as though the Xenos vessel had been consumed by the hulk itself. Ordmer nudged her. Heargith, Hearthguard Searherd is on Vox. They have a plan. She gave a wry glance in reply. Whatever the Void Revenants were planning, it would not be dull. Inside the hidden city, Searherd concluded his hololith scan, his armor projector casting a flickering wireframe of Ælfscathea in the air. I have mapped all I can from this position. Combined with Torhairn's scans, we now have a functional battle map. Bjornwolf nodded. Then we move into the city. Bergwijn looked down at his white cataphractii plate and the massive shield in his fist. You don't think anyone will notice a squad of Astartes walking through their streets? Bjornwolf's grin was feral. Everyone we've met so far seems to assume we are a chaos warband. He glanced at his own battered plate, then at the rest of the Hearthguard. White, bone-stained armor, the Void Revenant's true colors of blue were hidden. He tore a silken drape from the gantry and bound it across his imperial sigil. Let's see how the other side lives, he said, and strode toward the towers of Ælfscathea, the Hearthguard following like silent wraiths into the Xenos kingdom. Once they reached deck level, the Void Revenants paused to take in the city's scale. Searherd, Bjornwolf said, his voice low and even, Take Bergwijn and make your way to the arena. Find out where they keep the prisoners. I have a suspicion we may find allies there. But remember, act with arrogance and move with purpose. Do not gawk. If anyone stops you, sneer and keep walking. If they believe we are chaos, they'll expect it. My place is by your side, Lord, Sirherd replied firmly. Well, Bornwolf said with a faint grin, if the shooting starts, come find me. I may need a bullet stop. Now go. He took the spare assault cannon magazines from Bergwijn, strapping them to his armor and covering the bulges with a strip of torn cloth. The shape could pass for some grotesque mutation, a convincing enough ruse in a city of nightmares. Don't worry, Ethelnoth laughed, hefting his assault cannon. We're only in the most feared pit of depravity in the Reach. What could possibly go wrong? The Hearthguard pair departed, vanishing into the bustle of the alien streets. Come, Bornwolf said to Ethelnoth. We walk with purpose toward the docks. Let any who watch think we go to our vessel. And Sirherd's role? Ethelnoth asked as they strode along. Cause a riot, free prisoners, and make a distraction, I assume? What about us? Planning to cut mooring lines or hand out fines for docking infractions? Either way, it doesn't seem much. Bjornwolf rested a hand on his axe haft. Not exactly. Torhern and Elfric have their own tasks, and Shipmaster Waldheer his. Alone, we cause inconvenience. Together, devastation. Ethelnoth chuckled darkly. Ah yes, hope. Always hope. Forgive me, Lord, but this feels like rolling dice and praying for high numbers. The streets of Ælfscathea swirled with life. Alien life. Drukhari slavers, rogue human merchants, and Xenos of species Bornwolf couldn't name moved through the shadowed markets. Some spared the armored giants a glance, but none interfered, until a squad of Drukhari emerged from the crowd. 3 blocked the path. 1 lingered by a market stall. The last, clearly an officer, stepped forward, grinning as he plucked a strange, spined fruit from the display and bit into it. I don't recall seeing your livery, he said, his voice smooth and mocking. From what cabal do you hail? The stall owner started to protest, but a Drukhari drew a thin blade, and the merchant fell silent. None of your business, whelp, Beornwolf replied, his tone a growl of iron. The officer laughed, and his warriors raised their weapons. A long, curved sword flashed up, pressing against Bornwolf's gorget. Then it is my business, the officer purred, unless you'd prefer your head to explain your misdeeds to witch sorceress Iseraneza, without your body, of course. Iseraneza? Bornwolf spat the name with genuine disgust. I hear the apple fell far from the tree with that one. Her mother died falling off a cliff, didn't she? A noble end indeed. The officer's eyes narrowed, and the blade pressed harder, but the rune on Bornwolf's armor flared, burning the Drukhari poison to ash. The Xenos hesitated, just long enough. Bornwolf tilted his head, voice cold. Careful. The officer withdrew a step, bowing his head slightly. My apologies, I did not know I addressed a sorcerer lord. Bornwolf gestured to his tattered silks. I am incognito. The officer's gaze slid to the assault cannon in Ethelnoth's hands. Heavy weapons are forbidden within the city. That one must be surrendered. Ethelnoth's helm tilted, the cannon's barrels spinning up with a soft whine. Oh, give up my cannon? He said in a booming voice. He swung the weapon toward Bornwolf with mock outrage. He wants me to give up my cannon, Lord! My cannon! A gift from a Slaneshi demon prince! The nearby merchants ducked in terror. He leaned toward Bornwolf in a conspiratorial stage whisper that somehow carried louder than his shout. He said the same, you know. He asked for gifts for the whole warband, and he got one. He lifted the cannon above his head triumphantly. Beneath this armor is a tentacle, fused to my living cannon. I can't drop the damn thing. The Drukhari recoiled in disgust. The officer's eyes flicked to Bornwolf. And what was your gift? Bjornwolf slowly raised his augmetic hand, patched together from servitor components, smaller than the original, crude and ugly. He wiggled the fingers theatrically. Oh, I had a tentacle too, he said in a low, ominous tone, but I chose to remove it. The officer's expression twisted in revulsion. Very well, he said. Clearly he wanted nothing more to do with these madmen. He waved them past. Bjornwolf paused only to toss a grimness shilling to the fruit vendor. Always pay your debts, he said, and strode into the crowd with Ethelnoth. Behind them, one of the Drukhari sneered. How far humanity has fallen. The officer nodded, biting into his fruit again. He flicked another coin to the vendor and led his men away. The roar of the crowd struck them as they approached the arena, a mixture of cheers, hisses, and guttural laughter that carried over the market square. Sirherd and Bergwijn paused at a stall draped in tattered silk and hung with cages of live creatures, the smell of spiced meat and oil mixing with blood and incense. They stood still for a moment, the better to take in the sounds and the sights of the witch arenas of Ælfscathea. Inside, visible through a gap in the heavy curtains, a Xenos horror fought for its life. It was like a centipede, but its chitinous plates had been pierced by augmetics, its dozens of legs replaced with hooked blades and powered saws. The thing scuttled over the sand with unnatural speed, lashing out at a ring of Imperial Navy armsmen. They wore little more than tattered uniforms and were armed only with wooden poles, driven like cattle to their slaughter. The crowd shrieked with approval as the creature tore one of the men in half, his scream silenced by a triumphant chime of alien horns. Sirherd moved on without flinching. "Pitiful," he said under his breath. Bergwijn followed, his hand resting on the grip of his bolt pistol beneath the folds of his concealing drapery. "Where do you think they keep the pens?" Sirherd nodded toward a stairway that wound down beneath the arena. The stone steps were slick with damp and reeked of filth and decay. Guards stood at the bottom, 4 Drukhari, their armor lacquered black and purple, hooks and barbs catching the torchlight. Sirherd did not hesitate. He strode forward with the purposeful arrogance Bjornwolf had demanded of him. "I have a wager with my captain," he said, waving a hand casually toward the arena above. "I want to see the next group of human stock, see what shape they're in before I commit my coin. My bet is considerable." The Drukhari exchanged glances, amused but wary. Sirherd reached into a pouch and produced a hand of rings, each one forged of dark gleaming steel. He let them clink together in his palm. "Drukhari steel, the finest," he said. One of the guards tilted his head, half impressed. Bergwijn leaned in and said, "You're giving them your rings?" Sirherd grinned beneath his helm. "After tonight, I'll have 1,000 more." The guards considered, then stepped aside with predatory smirks. Sirherd and Bergwijn descended into the slave pens. The air was heavy with despair and rot. Behind the bars crouched Imperial Navy crewmen, many bearing the insignia of ranking officers. Astra Militarum soldiers and technical specialists filled the other cells, their bodies scarred from lashings, their eyes sunken but not yet devoid of defiance. A man stepped forward to meet them, his commissar's uniform torn and bloodied, his back crisscrossed with scars. He glared with pure loathing, then spat at Sirherd's boots. "Traitors," he said, his voice ragged. "Chaos scum. You shame the Emperor's face with every breath." Sirherd's response was slow and deliberate. He reached up and tore away the silks covering his chest, revealing the silver quilla engraved with the sigil of the Void Revenants. The icon gleamed in the dim light of the pens. "I am Captain Sirherd Kinberg," he said, his voice a low growl. "Hearthguard of the chapter master of the Void Revenants. I am not here to rescue you." He leaned forward, letting the commissar see the gleam in his eyes. "I am here to give you vengeance, in the Emperor's name." Runesmith Torhern crouched by the vault door, his augmetic hands deftly adjusting a set of micro-tools that extruded from his mechadendrites. Each delicate movement whispered in the dark, the faint clicks and whirs of precision engineering lost in the cavernous silence of the derelict warehouse district. The lock was a hybrid of Imperial make and Xenos modification, once an honest Navy storage vault for thruster packs and emergency ship components, now corrupted by decades of Drukhari tampering. Its machine spirit sulked like a chained beast, bristling at his touch. Torhern murmured in soft binaric canticles, cooing reassurance as he inserted a tendril into the data socket. A tiny cascade of sparks ran across the metal, and a grumbling thunk echoed through the chamber. The mechadendrites twitched in satisfaction. "Quiet now. Yes, good," Torhern whispered, soothing the rebellious circuits as he suppressed the alarm initiators. A faint pulse of green light ran along the seams of the vault as its wards fell silent. Behind him, Hearthguard Cinnabil loomed in the shadows of the vast hangar passage, his bone-white armor half-cloaked by silks stolen from the market below. He kept his heavy shield and power axe ready, helm scanning for movement. The warehouse district around them had once been a proud imperial storage array, wide enough for fighter craft to taxi between bays. Now it had become a mercantile slum of the Ælfscathea underworld. Drukhari merchants, rogue traders, and pirates rented the bays to store their ill-gotten cargo. Outside the open archway, a grav hauler floated idly in the street. Once an ornate ceremonial transport from a minor forge world, likely Castell, given the faded engravings of cog and flame, it now bore only neglect and filth. Its bed was piled high with crates under dark green drapes, a few of them suspiciously stained. Torhern chuckled softly to himself as the final locking rune surrendered with a muted click. "Perfect," he said in binaric, the syllables translating as a happy mechanical squeak. "2 more vaults like this, and we shall have what we came for." He swung the door open, revealing the dim interior. Inside, stacked methodically as if by servitors, were crates of heavy munitions and a rack of void-sealed weaponry, imperial pattern, scavenged from a dozen different sources. Exactly what the manifest had promised. "Finally," he said, "something honest in this wretched city." Cinnabil had traded a considerable amount of the coin they had taken from the bodies of the Grimness expedition they had stumbled across. The corpses looked ancient, desiccated within their corroded void suits, at first leading them to think these explorers had been lost for millennia. Yet the coinage they carried was still legal tender within the reach, the newest minting bearing the sigil of Arch-Magos Censarax Centauri's predecessor, some 50 years earlier. It wasn't much in terms of history, but the currency had proven valuable. The manifest they had acquired promised the contents of each sealed vault, supplies that could tilt the balance of their mission. They had selected 3 targets so far, but instead of the las weapons, void suits, personal refractor fields, and other tools they expected, the results had been bitterly disappointing. The first vault, though its seal and imperial cogitator lock seemed untouched, opened to reveal nothing but a pile of stained silk bales, their weaves stiff with age and faintly smelling of damp. The second should have contained personal shields, rebreathers, and 4 crates of grenades. Instead, they found a scattering of ancient ale kegs, mostly empty, the residue inside smelling more of engine oil than grain. The third vault was the greatest insult. According to the manifest, it should have held a dozen crates of combat blades, Mark II naval body armor, Eldari long rifles, and, most prized of all, a pair of bespoke Void Captain's boots and a bottle of vintage port. Instead, it was utterly bare, but for a battered pair of cracked leather boots, a sprinkling of sand in the soles, and a dented tin flask with a broken cap. By the time they had sealed that one again, Cinnabil was starting to think the entire manifest had been a decoy, or worse, a deliberate trap to lure them into wasting time. That suspicion only deepened when he realized the vault access protocols were still broadcasting encrypted Imperial Lex codes. Exactly the kind of signals a Mechanicus Lexmech could use to backtrace and infiltrate the station's inner data net. They were preparing to abandon the search when they found it, one vault whose contents matched the manifest exactly, and more besides. Cinnabil gave a low grunt from the shadows, but before Torharn could step inside, movement caught his attention. 2 Drukhari guards were approaching along the passage, their steps light but purposeful. They halted when they saw the open vault and Torharn standing there. "You have a key for that vault?" one asked, his voice a drawling sneer. The other gestured at the other nearby doors. "Or the next 4? Torharn turned with deliberate slowness, letting the cables of his mechadendrites coil lazily around him like predatory serpents. "My key transcriber is unfortunately non-functional. I am opening them by hand." The first guard's lip curled. "You Dark Mechanicum? Maybe?" Torhern said flatly, tilting his head. "You don't look Dark Mechanicum." He raised his mechadendrites in silent answer, their tip lights blinking like watchful eyes. The guards exchanged a glance. The second unslung his flamer. "We will take you to the Kabbalite machinist," he said. "He will extract the truth from you." Torhern sighed, almost theatrically. "I do not think that would be possible." The first Drukhari opened his mouth to retort. Crack! Crack! 2 sharp impacts echoed through the hall. Both guards crumpled like puppets with their strings cut, their chests caved in from the force of Cinnabil's strikes. The Hearthguard emerged from the darkness, dragging their bodies with casual strength. He tossed them into a nearby empty vault and pushed the door nearly closed, leaving only a sliver of shadow. "That's 2 sets of guards," Cinnabil said. "They'll start to notice if we linger." Torhern turned back to the vault with a pleased hum. "Then let us work quickly. We have what we came for, and I feel like stealing a bit more while we can." Cinnabil chuckled grimly as he moved to start loading crates. Cinnabil sat back in the grav transport, his heavy frame making the creaking vehicle seem almost fragile. The stolen drapes fluttered in the stale air, half concealing the crates of void gear and the bodies of the 2 Drukhari guards hastily hidden beneath them. He kept his helmeted gaze on the bustling avenues of Ælfscathea as they sped away, the lights of the marketplace shrinking behind them. "They won't let us get away with this a third time," he said, his voice low and edged with the tension he always carried in enemy territory. "2 sets of guards already missing. Someone will notice." Runesmith Torhern sat in the front, his augmetic hands calmly operating the crude grav controls. A small grin tugged at the corners of his mouth as his mechadendrites fussed with the interface, occasionally hissing binaric chatter to the machine spirit. "Oh, don't worry," he said, with a confidence that bordered on cheerfulness. "That was the last vault we needed. Now," he tapped a rune on his wrist display, projecting a flickering Auspex overlay into the air. "We need to reach the maintenance decks, subsection 6. According to all the Auspex augurs, that is where the main control relay will be." Cinnabil frowned behind his visor. "The control relay? You mean the control center? That will be heavily guarded, more heavily than anywhere else in this cursed city." Torhern chuckled in a low, satisfied hum of static, glancing over his shoulder. "Oh no, brother. The control center is where the Drukhari sit on their gilded thrones, pulling levers and pushing buttons, yes. It's heavily shielded, well protected, redundant, a fortress of switches and arrogance. But the control relay?" He waggled a mechadendrite for emphasis. "That is where the real flow of power runs, raw energy, gate permissions, life support anchors. And I can promise you, no one ever guards the relay, no one ever even thinks about it." Cinnabil grunted, unconvinced, watching the cityscape loom around them as they descended a sloping avenue toward the heart of the space hulk. Ælfscathea rose in impossible geometry, black spires and barbed bridges studded with the faint gleam of slave lanterns and neon sigils. The grav transport glided past swarming crowds, pirates, slavers, and twisted Xenos creatures, none giving more than a fleeting glance at the covered cargo. "You had better be right," Cinnabil said. Torhern's binaric laughter clicked and chirped over the transport's engine hum. "I am always right when it comes to machinery, brother. If we reach the relay, the city will be ours to adjust." The grav vehicle dove into a lower tunnel, the daylight of the market vanishing behind them as they drove toward the hidden arteries of the hulk. High above the shadowed streets, Gastward Ælfric stood upon the narrow wall walk, cloak trailing like smoke in the low light. Beside him, Wilmund crouched, his helm lenses glinting red as he watched the flow of the Drukhari city below. A grav conveyance slid beneath them, half concealed under ragged drapes, piloted by runesmith Torhern. For a moment, the vehicle's hum was the only sound between the 2 Void Revenants. "They're late," Wilmund said, checking the chronometer fixed to his vambrace. "Time," Ælfric replied absently, "is subjective." The Hearthguard gave him a side glance but said nothing more. They moved on along the high wall, stepping between flickering ward lamps and skeletal gargoyles that leered over the avenue below. Ælfric felt himself drifting, his mind unmoored from the present, like a ship at warp drift. He watched Torhern's grav vehicle vanish into the press of the city and thought of Beornwulf. The chapter master was reckless, too eager to play the barbarian king, skulking in the shadows and haggling with Xenos slavers instead of cleansing them in holy fire. Iron hands would never debase themselves with such subterfuge. "I am best suited to lead this chapter," Ælfric thought coldly. "These Wirthan wretches are little better than feral savages, bound by superstition and crude honor. They cannot see the Imperium's truth. I could shape them into a weapon, or end them before they become a threat." And beneath that thought, the whisper stirred, "Your place is there." Mentis's voice, as clear as if the Iron Hand Psyker walked beside him once more. Had his meaning been misunderstood? Perhaps Mentis had not meant for Ælfric to lead the Void Revenants, but to watch them, to contain them, to ensure that these half-feral Astartes never became a danger to the Imperium. Once this campaign was complete, he could return to Medusa, his duty fulfilled, perhaps even claim his rightful role within the Mentor Psychana. But first, there was work to do. The gates of the central tower loomed ahead, an obsidian arch laced with leering alien sigils. 2 Drukhari guards stepped forward, halberds crossed. Ælfric did not break stride. He reached out with invisible force, and the guards' bones cracked like dry branches. They crumpled to the polished stone, armor clattering in the silence. The gates groaned and split open as if in deference. The Astartes strode through into the bridgeway beyond, shadow and fog curling around the banners of flayed skin that hung over the chasm. "That was a little showy," Wilman said at last, his voice dry. "I thought we were supposed to be incognito." Ælfric did not answer. He felt a presence beside him, a figure that was not Wilmand. Mentis, or something wearing his voice, walked in lockstep with him. "Your place is here?" The shade murmured. Ælfric's gaze dropped to the bridge's flagstones, where the light of the city's corpse lamps cast their shadows. Wilman's was as it should be, a broad-shouldered Astartes silhouette. Ælfric's was wrong, slender, tapering, and crowned with long, curling horns. Aboard the Eotinsip, Shipmaster Waldheer oversaw the controlled chaos of final preparations. The strike cruiser's forward compartments were stripped bare. The engineering crews had removed the auxiliary ore thrusters from the cruiser and bolted them directly to the battered hull of the derelict hulk, welding them into place against the broad baffle plate. Makeshift cabling and fuel feeds ran across the scorched metal, improvised but precise. On the bridge, Waldheer's voice carried with measured command. "Seal all forward bulkheads. Vent compartments 2 through 6. Initiate void purge on the prow." Warning klaxons echoed as the forward sections of the Eotinsip went dark and silent. Through reinforced observation panes, the void bled in, black and eternal. Engineers below flooded the torpedo room with viscous sealant foam. The torpedoes had long since been stripped, their drives now cannibalized to serve as crude thruster banks for the operation. The prow would become their battering ram, and the foam would become its ablative shield. On the Vox, Voidmaster Ordmer's voice crackled, tight with anticipation. "Moving in now, Lord Shipmaster." "Steady, Ordmer," Waldheer replied, leaning on the arm of his command throne as the Eotinsip's silhouette drifted closer to the hulk. "Nose her in gently. She is as much a ghost as a ship now. Treat her with respect." Beneath the silent gaze of the Emperor, Hālgengas led his voidsmen from the airlock, their boots clanging softly against the deck. They passed through the holographic cameoline veil, vanishing into what appeared from outside to be nothing more than the hulk's seamless hull. The illusion rippled as they moved through, and the void opened into the gutted interior. Shadows loomed in the derelict corridor, vast bulkheads and skeletal gantries, remnants of a vessel that had once served the Imperium faithfully. Beyond, they could see the freighter that had been bolted to the hulk's flanks, its hull riddled with cables, its reactors thrumming faintly. Energy lines ran into the Ælfscathea port, leaching from the freighter like arteries feeding a parasite. Far above, hidden within the jagged skeleton of a Hablock tower, a Drukhari scout crouched. He watched the humans pass, his narrow eyes gleaming behind his mask. A gesture, quick and sharp, sent his kill team slithering into the shadows, moving to surround the path ahead. "What are they doing here?" the scout murmured in his sibilant tongue, half in amusement, half in contempt. Escaped prisoners, no doubt. Perhaps they thought they could seize the freighter and flee, as so many fools had tried before. He grinned, baring sharpened teeth. The Mon-K would never understand. That freighter's reactors powered only the atmospheric shell and the vast camelioline field. Its engines were dead. Better to let the humans believe they were free. Let them reach the freighter, let hope rise in their primitive hearts. When they thought themselves safe, when they believed escape was in their grasp, then the kill would come, and their despair would be exquisite. Far above, in the highest reaches of the space hulk's tangled interior, Runesmith Torhern pried open an access panel that had clearly not been touched in 5,000 years. Pale glowing mushrooms clung to its rust-flaked edges, and for reasons he chose not to question, a cluster of barnacle-like growths clung stubbornly to the metal. With a grunt and a flex of his mechadendrites, Torhern wrenched the panel free. Behind him, Cinnabil caught it in one power-armored hand and tossed it aside, where it clanged into the shadows. Torhern dropped lightly onto the deck below. The chamber was in use, but its maintenance was clearly neglected, a thin, undisturbed layer of dust coating the floor. "I told you," he said, his vox-gridded voice amused. "The control relay is never guarded." Cinnabil landed heavily behind him, the impact of his Terminator bulk denting the deck plates. He looked up and down the long, low chamber. The ceiling was perhaps 10 feet high, but the room stretched in either direction with the scale of a cathedral. The gravity sloped subtly downward toward one end, and Cinnabil could make out a faint tide line along the bulkheads, left by long-spilled coolant. The entire passage, if that was even what it was choked with pipes and cables, its corners filled with desiccated servitors, their sockets staring, and flickering lumens giving the illusion of watchful eyes. "What does it do?" Cinnabil rumbled. Torhern moved from trunk to trunk of the massive relay structures, tapping them with his gauntlet as he passed. Each resembled a cabled tree, its roots and branches a mess of conduits, fiber bundles, and wire knots. "If a starship truly is a living machine," the runesmith said, his voice carrying a hint of reverence, "then this is the base of its spinal column." He paused by a flickering lumen and gave it a light tap. "A hind brain of the motive force," he chuckled quietly and began arming melta-charges on each relay trunk. Cinnabil watched him work, then opened his vox. "We are in position." He hefted his thunderhammer and began walking down the sloped passage toward the dimmer, green-lit end, where the coolant had pooled into a shallow, lapping tide. Each relay he passed, he clamped a charge to its base, the magnetic locks snapping shut with satisfying finality. He tutted as he went, muttering to himself like a patient executioner. Out on the hull of the space hulk, the Drukhari kill team moved like shadows along the fat, frost-rimed cables connecting the derelict freighter to the ancient mass of Ælfscathea. Vast power conduits thrummed faintly with stolen energy, feeding the atmospheric generator and the camellia-line cloak that had hidden the port of the Void City for centuries. No auspex stirred, no proximity rune pulsed a warning. This was the realm of hunters, and they were the apex. The team's captain reached a hatch that had been left ajar, the edges warped and half-welded from old repairs. He grinned behind his barbed visor. He had assumed the voidsmen they were pursuing were nothing more than escaped slaves or desperate convicts. It happened from time to time. Captives unwilling to entertain the arenas would slip into the derelicts, thinking they had found a path to freedom. They would always come here, to the old freighters and broken halls, and the Drukhari would always find them. The moment they realized their failure, when despair's icy hand closed around their hearts, that was when the kill team struck. The kill was nothing next to the taste of that fear. Within the freighter's gullet, he pointed toward the bridge with a taloned gauntlet. "They always go for the bridge," he said, chuckling. "We will give them the bad news." His warriors grinned, silent predators in glimmering void visors hugging the broken shadows of the freighter's ribcage as they advanced. The captain idly wondered why the prey had left no rear guard. Convicts usually did, but it didn't matter. They would take them all in one swoop, the perfect harvest. The corridor went still. The only light came from the gas giant below, reflected in dim shards through the open hatch and casting the Drukhari as jagged silhouettes. Ordmare moved first, his helmeted head tilting around the edge of a corroded brace. "That was close," he whispered. Across from him, crouched in the opposite recess, Hālgengas turned her visored face toward him. "Why are you whispering?" she hissed. "They might hear us," he said. Hālgengas shook her head slowly, the faint blue light catching on the scratches of her armor. "We're on cable-linked vox. No one can hear us but our squad." Ordmare blinked, remembering the lifeline that ran from their suits to the hidden repeater node. He leaned back to check the line. It still snaked out of the hatch and along the hull, unnoticed by the Xenos. He breathed a little easier and slid back into cover. "I don't get it," Hālgengas said after a moment, watching the Drukhari creep toward the freighter's bridge. "Why are they going to the bridge? It's dead." No engines, no guns, no guidance. It's a coffin. Ordmare shrugged in the dark. Maybe they think we went that way. Why would we? She asked flatly. He didn't answer. Instead, he keyed his Vox to the Void Squad channel. We have company. How long? In the freighter's rusted engine room, their comrades were busy planting shaped charges around the cracked plasma cores. The space flickered with the cold blue light of unstable reactors, shadows rippling like water under moonlight. The old ship's heart wheezed and hissed, kept alive more by habit and the prayers of dead engineers than by functioning machine spirits. Almost done, their officer voxed back. This heap is held together by prayers and rust. Hold that hatch until we're topside. Ordmare clicked the Vox and said to himself, if they come back this way, we're done for. Hālgengas said nothing. She crawled across the threshold, maglocking a charge to the wall just beyond the hatch. Then she unspooled a thin filament, stringing it across the passage, then another and another, tripwires in a lace of death. Sliding back into the shadows, she pressed a Vox thief to the corroded hull just outside the hatch, masking any stray signal bleed. Ordmare watched, feeling suddenly foolish. He drew his Serpenta pistol, charging the cell with a quiet hum. Hālgengas leaned into the shadows across from him, her own weapon ready. They waited in silence, the distant groan of the Hulk and the whisper of the gas giant their only companions. They would not wait long. Sirherd laid the Drukhari guard down, the corpse's hand still twitching near its empty holster. Absent-mindedly, he passed the stolen weapon to one of the prisoners. Hearthguard Bergwijn eased the guard he had crept upon into a chair, arranging the limp form as if it were only asleep. He even draped a ragged shawl over the ashen face before nodding to his captain. Sirherd glanced out into the courtyard beyond the passage. Once, it had been a recycling pit for the Thunderbolt heavy fighter bays, but now it served as a convenient place to pile the arena dead, bodies left to rot for the amusement of the Drukhari. Normally, a crewed transport would arrive to collect the corpses, or the pieces, and haul them to whatever obscene disposal the Xenos favored. Sirherd had deemed it the perfect rendezvous for Torhern to deliver their liberated equipment. No one ever guarded the corpse chute, save for the two Drukhari, who were now corpses themselves. The transport was waiting, an odd, insectile machine somewhere between a grav car and a heavy hauler. Behind him, the prisoners were gathering. Tattered Imperial uniforms, mostly officers in low ranks, their faces pale with pain but burning with eager hatred. Good, he thought. They will get what they desire soon enough. He raised a hand in battle sign for them to hold position. First, he would double-check the cargo. His disguise had worked so far, a few more seconds of care could prevent disaster. Bergwijn made to follow, but Sirherd signed for him to hold. Time was short, but Bjornwolf had ordered caution. He stepped out into the open. "Heretic scum!" A voice spat the words, and a bolt pistol swung out of the shadows, aimed at his face. Sirherd moved with Astarte's speed. He caught the pistol, wrenching it away, and felt bone crack under his grip. In the same motion, he slammed the attacker against the wall with one hand. A second assailant lunged from the shadows with a Drukhari blade, but held it wrong, like a kitchen knife. Sirherd plucked the blade from his hand and, almost lazily, tossed it aside, giving the man a light backhand that sent him sprawling against the waiting transport. The vehicle rocked slightly with the impact. Out in the street beyond the bay, a few Drukhari passers-by turned at the noise. Seeing what appeared to be a chaos of Astartes roughing up two of the arena's guards, they merely shook their heads and moved on. "Traitor scum," gasped the man pinned in Sirherd's grip, choking against the gauntlet. Sirherd studied him. The armor was cheap Drukhari plasteel, ill-fitting, and the man on the floor had sworn in the cadence of Sarathar. The one he was holding had a heavy grimness accent. It made little sense, until a tin flask slipped from the man's breastplate and clattered to the deck. Bergwijn rounded the corner, weapon raised, but lowered it at the sight. Sirherd let the man down. He gasped, snatched up his flask, and panted for air. He stammered. Sirherd shook his head and handed the bolt pistol back. "Constable Dornstall and Lexmek Ranjan, I admit I had not foreseen meeting the two of you on Ælfscathea." Dornstall rubbed his bruised hand, nodding. "That's Warrant Officer Dornstall, Lord," he corrected. glancing toward the prisoners now moving to collect weapons and gear. "We thought you were Chaos Astartes," he admitted. "We get that a lot," Bergwijn said, pulling the concealing fabric from his shield. "The question remains," Sirherd said, voice like iron. Lexmech Adept Ranjan retrieved his blade and inclined his head. "With respect, Lord, we were freeing the prisoners. As were we." Sirherd looked around. "And how exactly were you planning to arm them?" Dornstall nodded toward the lockers at the back of the bay. Inside, they were stacked high with Imperial weapons and gear. "We raided the storage vaults," he explained almost proudly. "Put old cloth and wine casks in their place." Sirherd chuckled as he secured his helm. "That solves a riddle," he said. "Now get suited up. You're joining my prison breakout." Dornstall grinned, taking a long drink from his flask before Ranjan tossed him a rebreather. "I think our odds just improved," he said. Bjornwolf made a show of examining a cart of wares, letting his fingers run over the tarnished relics and scavenged arms. He tossed a handful of coin to the vendor and lifted a serpenta from a rack of ancient pistols, testing its balance with a casual swing. The weapon felt right, solid, elegant in its lethality. With a grin, he sighted along its barrel and lined it against his bolter for comparison, then slid the serpenta into his holster. It fit as though it had always been meant for him. Nearby, the Drukhari dock guards, who had been eyeing the Void Revenants, seemed to lose interest. They drifted toward a group of chaos-aligned squats, arguing loudly with a Dentrati trader, their voices sharp and grating over the mechanical hum of the docks. Ethelnoth, crouched over the skeletal frame of a newly acquired servo skull, gave a small nod as he tuned the Novaterran pattern cogitator. The little machine chirped in binary as it darted upward, selecting targets in the bay with precise sweeps. The Drukhari defensive augurs ignored it, just as he had expected. In his element, Ethelnoth cycled the drum of his assault cannon and gave a quiet chuckle. "They're gone," he said casually. The squad moved onto the docking platform, 2 miles of corroded plasteel covered by a haze of shimmering hollow fields. Here, the air was thick with the stench of oil, ozone, and the faint sourness of decay. Ships of every origin rested in uneasy silence. Lightly armed raiders, sleek skimmers, and a pair of destroyer-sized vessels whose aft sections shimmered as they breached the atmospheric envelope, too massive to fully dock. A newly arrived shuttle dominated the scene, a chimera of stolen engineering. Its hull was imperial in origin, with angled gull wings from an incolorous forge. The oversized engines bore the design signatures of grimness, and a manifold Dawn quad-heavy bolter turret leered from a spherical ball mount. Tattered logos of Forge World Castell were still visible beneath layers of scorch and blood. Squat prisoners, their tunics ragged and marked with the sigils of Cragford Hold, unloaded precious silks under the watch of a lounging Drukhari pirate. The alien wore the skull of the shuttle's former owner as a headdress and occasionally lashed out with a boot at the slaves. A witch with a barbed lash struck more enthusiastically, leaving welts on the dwarves' scarred skin. Despite their wounds, the squats' faces still showed defiance. Bjornwolf felt a dark exhilaration surge through him. Enemies surrounded them. His warriors were in place. Their prey had no inkling what awaited them. He was certain that they would all probably die here, but the Drukhari would pay dearly. To stumble upon the hidden city of Ælfscathea after centuries of rumor and shadow was a gift he could not squander. The docks sprawled across the interior of the Space Hulk in a chaos of metal and shadow. It was hard to tell where the docking platforms ended and the markets and taverns began. Perhaps the Drukhari had no concept of order. But their disorder had its uses when one moved within their walls. Bjornwolf smiled faintly. Then his augmetic monocular caught movement. On the upper gantry, walking from the city gates toward the main platform, was a tall figure with a black blade. Beside him walked a slender woman, unmistakably Ezirshi, or perhaps Izaraneza. They could wait. Bjornwolf unclipped his bolter, carrying it not as a weapon but as a convenient grapnel launcher, and drifted closer to a line of squat prisoners unloading crates from a nearby shuttle. He set a heavy boot down beside one of them with a deliberate clang. Metal struck metal, echoing in the cavernous space. The squat flinched, glancing up in fear, only to find the Astartes' shadow looming. Beornwolf rested one hand on his hip and flicked his other in the subtle shapes of Cragford, hold battle signs, fingers cutting meaning into the air. The squat's eyes darted about, then he gave the barest nod before looking away. The witch overseer hadn't noticed a thing. As Beornwolf moved on, the squat tripped, letting his heavy crate of spices smash against the chapter master's chest. Beornwolf bellowed in sudden fury, seizing the squat by the collar and jerking him so violently that the chain on his neck snapped. "Filthy whelp," he roared, throwing the prisoner to the deck. "Look what you've done," he added, brushing streaks of red and green spice powder from his silken robes with exaggerated disgust. The nearest witch froze in horror, then hissed an apology and raised her barbed whip. Two vicious strikes tore the squat's back open, blood blooming across his rags. Beornwolf caught her wrist mid-swing. The whip lashed across his armor, a single barb scratching his ceramite. The witch twisted with inhuman speed, ready to strike, but the Astartes only laughed, a low, mirthless laugh that rolled through the docking bay like thunder. Her sisters began to gather, blades and barbs glinting. "Watch your wards," Beornwolf said, tightening his grip just enough to grind bone and draw a hiss of pain. "By rights, I should void you for your incompetence." "Sorry, Lord," she stammered in the clipped cadences of common trade, fangs glinting behind her lips. Beornwolf sighed theatrically and released her with deliberate grace. "You are lucky," he said, voice dripping with mock regret. "My wagers have gone well today. I will not request your hide to hang upon my ship." He gestured toward another squat holding a crate of spices. With a lazy flick of his hand, he tossed a handful of coins to the witch. "What you win, you share, eh?" he boomed. The nearby pirates and dockhands avoided his gaze. A Chaos Astartes lord who laughed was worse than one who killed. "I will have one of those crates sent to my ship," he added, waving vaguely toward a cluster of 3 pirate craft in the lower berths, his meaning deliberately unclear. Then he gave a short bow and stalked deeper into the sprawl. Behind him, the witches jeered and quarreled over the coins, and none noticed the squat he had manhandled slipping back into line with the other prisoners. One by one, the captives eased their chains from their collars. Under ragged cloaks, a bolter and the breathers and frag grenades began to pass down the line. The squat rubbed at the fresh welts on his back and watched the towering Astartes go. A small, sharp smile crossed his face. Beornwolf opened Squad Vox and requested status reports. One by one, his teams voxed in. Torhern, full diagnostic ready to run on your mark. Wilmond, visiting an old friend, just waiting to see them. Waldheer, Prometheum delivery on schedule, awaiting your orders. Lastly, Sirherd's voice came over the Vox. "Next match will start at any time, but you'll never guess who I ran into, an old friend from the Watch. They're here to wager on the next fight. Same bets as us, at least when it comes to the current match." There was a pause, then he added, "He brought some of that old ale you like, but it's held up in customs, the old captain's label and its sister brand, the Iron Lexicon." Beornwolf and Athelnoth exchanged glances. They switched to a private Vox channel as they made their way past vendors and stalls spilling out onto the dockyard. "That's cryptic," Athelnoth muttered. Beornwolf gave a low hum. "The Watch. That's the old Watch, the lawkeepers of Nitwertha. And Sirherd never says I. He'd say we. So Adeptus Arbites under an Inquisitor? And we know him?" Athelnoth added. "That'd be Dornstall, so Sarathar's Arbites Lexmec. Same bets, meaning they're planning a breakout too," Beornwolf said, nodding slowly. "But held up in customs?" Athelnoth grunted. "That'd be Captain Mandalik and the Lex Marshal, no doubt." Beornwolf chuckled softly. "Ale held in customs, so their landing party's stuck at the docking bay. Or," Athelnoth offered, "we're reading the cipher wrong, and they actually do have cases of ale on the landing pad." Beornwolf moved as if in idle conversation, turning so Athelnoth could use his targeting sensors to survey the docking bay over his pauldron without attracting suspicion. "And the sister?" Athelnoth asked, beginning his scan. "Only sister I can think of is the Hospitaller Order." Beornwolf clicked his tongue. "Katerina!" He adjusted his monocular. His bionic eye whirred into focus. "I can see the Kabbalite machinist," he said. The feed relayed to Beornwolf's ocular receiver. There, on a raised landing pad with a single shuttle, stood a cluster of yellow-clad prisoners and their guards. Sure enough, Bornwolf saw a face he recognized, Cabalite machinist Valeth. 2 guards stood nearby, one lazily resting against an engine block, the other lounging on a crate, but he knew that posture. Coiled springs, not true idleness. Several witch loitered around the perimeter. Bjornwolf studied the prisoners. They wore the gold yellow of Manifold Dawn, but the uniforms hung wrong, sleeves too long, boots mismatched, tunics ill-fitted. These weren't true Forgeborn. He knew the difference. He'd seen pride in the way real workers carried their colors. These were captives in borrowed skins. Then among them, he saw what he'd feared, the gray beard and bald pate of Captain Dayananda Mandalik, and beside him the Lex Marshal of the Arbites. But between them, black hair under a cap, stood another he recognized. His heart sank. His augmetic fingers flexed on the haft of his axe. Around him, the noise of the dockyard faded to a single note. The world narrowed to the upper platform. He opened the squad vox. "On my mark." To Ethelnoth he said, "We're making our way up there, but let them know we're coming." Ethelnoth gave a short gesture, and his new servo skull sprang to life, streaking ahead toward the gathering. The 2 Astartes moved forward at a calm, unhurried gait, casual but deliberate. The prisoners were gathered in a tight knot, hemmed in by sneering witches. Their yellow Manifold Dawn Voidsman uniforms were tattered and torn from recent battles. To a casual observer, they seemed authentic, broken survivors awaiting the cruel amusement of their captors. But to an experienced Voidsman of the Arcana Inclusium, the illusion was paper-thin. The first tell was the collar. Among true Dawn Voidsmen, it was tradition to pin the top left of the tunic down, proudly displaying the white scarf worn by every spacer of the Forge World fleet. These prisoners wore their collars fastened and tight, no white in sight. The second was their legwear. Manifold Dawn Voidsmen wore their puttees low, with a casual baggy fold to the trouser cloth, giving the leg freedom to flex in low-grav conditions. These captives had their coverings tucked in, crisp and tight, like the Sarathar-style gaiters of a ground-born militia. And last, perhaps most damning, was the headgear. No Dawn Voidsman would dare wear anything other than the fabric forage cap, angled just so, jaunty and proud. These men, those who had caps at all, wore them centered and dull, in the exact manner of Sarathar troops. All this despite sleeves worn too long, collars painfully stiff, and boots clearly chosen for size rather than comfort. To anyone who knew the Void Fleet, the deception was clumsy at best. Whether Cabalite machinist Valeth recognized this or not was uncertain. The 2 blade guards flanking him showed no sign of suspicion. Valeth tilted his head, his voice a soft hiss that carried the shape of a smile. "I am so sorry," he said, every word a serpent's caress. "I truly don't enjoy this." He extended a clawed finger toward the prisoners. One of his guards moved with a blur, faster than any human eye could track. To the prisoners, it was as if the Xenos teleported beside them. A man was seized, flung down onto the deck before the machinist with a resounding clang. "Now," Valeth said, voice suddenly businesslike, "mere innocent traders you are not. So, will you tell me why your vessel, a fine ship, I might add, from an engineering standpoint, was following the prison transport?" The man, wearing the chevrons of an officer, spat blood across Valeth's armored foot. There was a heartbeat of silence. Then Valeth sighed and stepped aside, wiping the blood away with a strip of cloth pulled from a nearby crate. He moved back to the prisoner, casual as a man tending his garden, and lifted him by the neck with one hand. "I am becoming bored of this," he said, and with an effortless motion, hurled the man through the invisible atmospheric shell of Ælfscathea. The prisoner tumbled silently into the void. In moments, his blood boiled and his skin blackened. He flailed briefly, then the struggle ended. Beyond him, other bodies in identical Manifold Dawn uniforms floated in a silent chain, the farthest slowly tugged downward by the gas giant's gravity. The remaining prisoners watched with unnerving calm, a composure that made even the Drukhari pause. Valeth exhaled through his teeth. "You are fast running out of contenders," he said, tone almost playful. "Who is next?" Among the captives, a woman in the lighter shade of a pilot's tunic glanced sidelong at the others. Her dark hair was tucked under her cap, brimmed dead center in the Sarathar style. The 2 prisoners nearest her gave the slightest nods of resignation, so faint only the 3 of them noticed. She turned her head, meeting the gaze of a man in a low-ranking text tunic, his neatly trimmed beard and augmetic eye betraying the truth, a void ship captain in disguise. Then his expression shifted. She followed his gaze. Among the many servo skulls darting through the cavernous docking bay, one hovered above the shuttle, seemingly inspecting it for repairs. But its lumen flickered, brief bursts of light in a deliberate pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, 1 long, 1 short. Battle sign. In binaric, in void speak. Mandalik's beard twitched as he read it, translating the message into battle sign with a casual motion of his lowered hand. Void Revenants. Positions ready, await orders. The woman scanned the crowd and saw them. 2 Chaos Marines, or so they appeared. One clad in pale bone white, the other in deep navy blue, both draped in silken robes. The white-armored giant carried a cannon. The other, towering and broad-shouldered, wore a helm crowned with boar tusks. His breastplate bore the same tusked motif. At his hip, an Eldari pistol rested in a cross-draw holster. Through the crowd, through helm lenses, he met her gaze and gave her the smallest of nods. She looked back to the captain and gave him a subtle wink. Then, slowly and deliberately, she rose to her feet. Valeth's finger, which had been aimed at the prisoners to his left, froze. He tilted his head like a predatory bird, shark-like eyes gleaming with new interest. A look of boredom shifted into surprise. "Ah," he said, glancing at his grinning guards. "Finally, a half-decent coward among wolves." He beckoned her forward with a broad smile. The prisoners kept their heads bowed as the woman stepped forward. The witches guarding the platform grinned, sharp teeth glinting in the lamplight of Ælfscathea's docks. They enjoyed this. The trembling walk of the doomed. The 2 blade guards were relaxed, or at least they wanted to look it. One leaned against the shuttle's engine block, his sword propped lazily on his shoulder. The other sat on a crate, idly spinning a dagger in his fingers. But Valeth knew them well. Their bodies were coiled springs, their smiles as false as their loyalty. Kabbalite machinist Valeth watched the human woman approach. Her tattered uniform bore blotches of dried blood, some red, some the darker, oily hue of Drukhari Vitae. Interesting. He considered the arrangement with Forge World Sarathar. It had been witch sorceress Eilith who negotiated the exchange, prisoners for wealth, rare ores, and the occasional service delivered to Ælfscathea's hidden docks. Since Eilith's death at the hands of the Void Revenants, Void Reaver had maintained the agreement. It was lucrative, and for years there had been no trouble. Until now, this transport had been followed, a first. He had been careful, of course, never bringing the actual prison barge to Ælfscathea, but still this suggested danger. The city's power was rooted in secrecy. Discovery meant death. Valeth's eyes scanned the line of prisoners. He knew humans, knew the types. The proud and silent, they never broke. There were 2 here. One with a beard glared at him now, the other, stern-faced, focused on the girl. The rank and file, faithful enough to resist torture but ignorant of anything important. The fools and the cowards, these were of some use, though often only as amusement. But he sought a specialist, a weak link. A translator, a pilot, a navigator, someone skilled but not trained to resist a mind like his. This one, the woman, yes, he thought, pilot's uniform, badly fitting. She carried herself like someone schooled in discipline but not in war. Her posture was wrong for a terrified wretch, feet staggered, weight light on the rear leg. She knew how to move. He almost smiled. A trap or a prize. Either will amuse me. He extended a hand, long fingers ending in steel talons. "Welcome to Ælfscathea," he said, his voice a low, rich purr. Around them, the city lived and breathed. Traders shouted over one another in harsh cant. Whips cracked against the bare backs of slaves dragging cargo. The arena roared in the distance, its fiery glow reflecting off oily deck plates. The air stank of spices, roasting meat, and the sour tang of witchcraft. "I trust," Valeth continued, baring his teeth, "you are enjoying the hospitality of the city so far." The woman said nothing, cradling an arm as if injured, eyes wide with feigned fear. Valeth's grin widened. "She thinks to play me." Then she spoke, voice small. "Lord, will you spare me?" 2 prisoners lunged forward instantly, rage and oath spilling from their mouths. A blade guard slid off his crate and pressed a sword tip to the bearded man's chest, while a witch's barbed whip cracked across the second man's face, drawing blood. The other prisoners cowered in silence. Valeth chuckled. Enough theatrics, he said smoothly. He flicked his clawed hand toward the woman. Your life and death are not in your hands. Tell me what I wish to know, and perhaps you will see another day. In the control room of Ælfscathea, witch sorceress Hālgengas sat on what had once been the command throne of amigos of engine seers, now repurposed and defiled, draped in velvet and precious metals, its interfaces adapted to respond to the whims of cruelty rather than logic. Before her, Void Reaver and the younger sister Ælfscathea had only just arrived, cloaks dripping water from the atmospheric shell above. They brought news of a captured vessel, one that had foolishly tried to follow the Shadowfang into the city's hidden approach. They're being processed, Void Reaver was saying calmly. The Kabbalite machinist is interrogating the crew now. Can't you do it yourself? Ælfscathea snapped, tapping her lacquered claw against the armrest. Ælfscathea leaned against a wall panel engraved with torment script, plucking a handful of void grapes from a tray held aloft by a whimpering hover drone. We thought you should know, sister. You took Mother's place, and with that comes the plethora of mundane tasks. Receiving reports is one of them. Ælfscathea glared. Be careful, little viper, or that sharp tongue will be blunted. Ælfscathea grinned and stuck out her tongue, a long, forked thing adorned with 3 gold rings and ending in a bladed tip. Void Reaver gently closed her mouth with a clawed fingertip under her pale chin, then stole a grape for himself. Come now, children, he said silkily. Don't fight, unless you want to entertain the paying customers in the arena. Ælfscathea made a theatrical face of disgust, while Hālgengas sat back into her throne, crossing her long legs with deliberate elegance, careful not to entangle the barbed spurs that ran along her boots. On the subject of entertainment, she said, the space dead, those revenants, went to manifold dawn. Void Reaver strolled along the console tier, pausing occasionally to inspect the data hololiths and system readouts offered by obsequious Drakari techs. Our last raid on Neatwortha didn't slow them at all, he mused. Any reason? Ælfscathea clicked her tongue. That fool, Servo Prime Cognitron Feruvis, contacted the Officio Assassinorum. He requested a contract from House Arachi. Dull, said Ælfscathea, rolling her eyes. House Arachi always goes in for explosions. What's wrong with a poison blade? Explosives are so last millennium. They tend to work, Void Reaver replied offhandedly, still reading the quarterly income charts. Profits were up 15%. Good business, he thought. Ælfscathea shrugged. He paid well. With a bit of luck, the assassins will take the revenants off our backs for a while. I still say Mother's idea of luring an orc war to engulf their homeworld would have been more cost-effective, said Ælfscathea with a smirk. Neatwortha sits at the heart of the Arcana Inclusium, Ælfscathea replied flatly. An orc invasion would damage half our trade partners. That's bad for business. Void Reaver finally lost interest in the numbers and moved to the great balcony behind the throne. He made his way toward the high-arched balcony at the rear of the chamber, the great silvered doors opening for him with a sigh of pneumatic pressure and the whisper of chain servants. Beyond, the wind of Ælfscathea whipped through the high tower, carrying with it the scent of blood, oil, and spiced void fruit. The noise of the city drifted upward in broken snatches. Whip cracks, laughter, the bark of gunfire, the faint chant of the arena crowd, and always the grinding hum of industry. He stepped onto the balcony, his clawed boots clacking on the black glass tiles, the wind catching his long cloak, barbed and tattered at the edges. The young Ælfscathea followed, trailing behind like a shadow spun from silk and malice. Together they looked out over their domain. Below, the towers of Ælfscathea spiraled like thorns from a wound in the rock, entwined with gantries, cable bridges, and hovering barges. Above, great statues of impossible Xenos gods loomed over the highest spires, their eyes alight with captured souls. Everything glistened. The shimmer of wet steel, the flicker of hollow fire, the distant gleam of void ship hulls docked above the hive towers like carrion beasts at roost. Void Reaver allowed himself a rare smile of satisfaction. The city was growing, trade was flowing, blood was spilling. He looked downward now, his augmented eyes narrowing to a single point of absolute clarity, zooming without need for optics or implants. He fixed on the docking platform below, where Kabbalite machinist Valith was interrogating a line of prisoners beneath the shadow of a captured shuttle. And there, amidst the crowd, a figure, towering over the mess of traitors and ruffians, stood out. Only the homunculi of the Kabbalite machinist were as tall, or taller. At first, Void Reaver took it for a Chaos Lord. There were plenty of those, visitors from the scattered war bands lingering around the edge of the Reach, like Caden Ferrisborn, whom he had traded with not long ago. But the armor, the color of a storm-touched sea, and the silken robes draped across broad shoulders were different. They adorned nothing. They concealed. That in itself was a warning, yet it was not the armor that truly caught his eye. It was the helm. Boar tusks curled from either side. All who served Chaos wore symbols, some grotesque, some arcane, but boar tusks? He recognized those. If not the man, then the meaning. Void Reaver's smile died. He blinked. Once. Then again. There. Another Astartes. This one in cataphracti plate, his armor white and bearing some archaic heavy weapon. Across the warrior's pauldron, the effigy of a boar cast in bronze. That was it. Void Revenants. Here, in his city. Cain Saluth. He spat. The wind seemed to drop. Around him, the city held its breath. Azirshi, who had been leaning on the railing with bored grace, turned sharply toward him, her eyes already narrowing. Void Reaver's voice cracked through the command throne's vox feed, low and sharp as a knife sliding free of its sheath. He turned with sudden purpose, his cloak snapping behind him, and barked at the nearest tower guard. "Sound the alert. Call the garrison. We have Astartes on the deck. Call the arena. No, seal it. Mobilize the witch covens. Ready the skybarks. Now!" His voice rose to a jagged command that echoed across the steel and glass towers of Ælfscathea. Then he turned to his private comm feed. "Shadowfang, bring the ship to alert. Target docking spires 3 and 5. Priority clearance for full-spectrum weapons." Azirshi grinned, her eyes alight with the promise of blood and spectacle. She licked the edge of her bladed tongue and whispered, "Finally, something fun." Above the city, the cruiser Shadowfang lit its running lights and began to stir. Deep in its core, engines screamed to life. Down in the docking bay below, Valeth gave a mocking bow of false respect to the prisoner. "In your own time, of course." The black-haired woman nodded meekly. She stepped forward with lowered eyes, her voice soft. "We were trying to find Ælfscathea," Valeth frowned. "You were looking for the city?" His voice sharpened, barely audible above the roar of loading servitors and cargo haulers. "How could you know the transport was bound here? Unless—" his mind raced. Unless their dealings on Sarathar had been discovered. A sudden, sickening thought struck him. Had the ruling council been compromised? Could they have led Imperial forces here? The woman continued to look at him. "What exactly do you know about the city?" he demanded. "The Void Reaver caught you in open space. You cannot possibly know the location of Ælfscathea." He laughed, short and tight with a thread of nervousness. "Your forces can't find this place, and you're prisoners. You won't be leaving to tell anyone anything." The prisoners stirred uneasily. One of them, a bearded man with a neatly trimmed beard and augmetic eye, stiffened. His gaze swept across the platform. Movement caught his eye. 2 vast figures, hunched and robed, weaving silently through the crowd. He smiled. With slow precision, he eased an auto-pistol from beneath his oversized puttees, still watching the guards. Their attention remained fixed on the woman. She tilted her head, voice low but steady. "With respect, Lord." Her tone made Valeth lean in to hear. "You already brought an army into your city." Valeth's grin faltered. The slave pens, the arena, filled with Imperial soldiers. But how could they hope to break free? What threat could they pose? He stepped closer, lifting her chin with a taloned gauntlet. "How?" he hissed. "Or I'll strip the flesh from your bones and hang you from the city walls with only a rebreather for company." Then he heard it, far above, the thunder of Shadowfang's drives powering up. He glanced skyward. His last mistake. "My father," the woman whispered, lips close to his pointed ear, "was Gregor Malinovska." Valeth blinked. "What?" Far above, klaxons began to wail. The call to arms rolled like thunder through the city towers. Her voice was soft, final. "My name is Katerina, and it's the last name you'll ever hear." The blade flashed. Valeth jerked back, blood spraying from the knife buried in his neck. He staggered, clawing at the wound, but she was already moving. A vicious kick sent him stumbling toward the platform's edge. The guards leapt forward, but too late. She pressed her hand to his chest. The digital weapon discharged with a crack. The blast didn't kill him. His refractor field absorbed it, but overloaded catastrophically. The shimmering shield burst outward, throwing him back. His boot slipped on the edge of the docking ring, and he toppled over. He fell, through the atmospheric shell of the city, into the black beyond. His blood crystallized in icy plumes as he plummeted into the void, one clawed hand still pressed uselessly to his neck. The fall of Ælfscathea had begun.